Welcome to FO Talks. With me is Ed Tarnowski. He's a policy and advocacy director and the host of the State of Choice podcast. He is also a Young Voices contributor and he's joining us from Washington, D.C. Ed has recently written about rising crime in American cities. Welcome, Ed. How are you doing?
It's good to be here. Thanks for having me on. I am doing well. How about you?
I'm good as well. So you say that cities in the US are becoming unlivable. Can you basically tell our global audience what do you mean by that?
Absolutely. And I want to start by saying this from the perspective of someone who is a city dweller myself. I love what cities have to offer, the culture. I love having my cafe just a block away for my cortados in the morning. Many things I love about city culture. There's a reason that I've chosen to live in cities as someone who grew up in a small town. And that's why I want to see more than anyone our cities get to a place where people can feel, where they can thrive, people can feel safe, comfortable. But what we're seeing, unfortunately, in a lot of our cities is that's not happening. Families are feeling uncomfortable as we're seeing a small cohort of repeat offenders committing an oversized amount of the crime, like whether that be violent crime, it could be things like theft, especially in DC. We've seen a lot of that. And also antisocial behavior, like in some cities I've seen drug use on subways. We've seen chronic homelessness, all things that make a lot of people just uncomfortable living and using urban environments and the services they have to offer.
Right. You mentioned about Iryna Zarutska, and you wrote how her murder in Charlotte, North Carolina, basically shook people across the United States. Mm-hmm. What made this a turning point in public perception?
It's a great question. I think where it comes from is it was such a clear-cut case of something that was preventable. It was a policy choice. Her accused murderer had been in jail 14 times. He had been diagnosed with schizophrenia and left out on the streets. All things, him being on the street was completely avoidable. And while him being let out, whether it be from after 14 times in jail, being back on the street, or not being in the proper care that he required, I know that oftentimes these are things that are approached from a place of compassion, but I don't think it's compassionate. You're leaving a man on the street who's clearly troubled, and in this case, it led to someone's murder. It's not compassionate for the it's not compassionate for the murderer to have left him on the street when he was so troubled, and certainly not compassionate to society as a whole, or facing the consequences of having a dangerous person on the street.
You've actually given it a term. You've called it the revolving door. Can you basically explain what that is and what do you really mean by that?
Absolutely. So, for example, in New York, this is a stark number. In 2022, 30% of the city's 22,000 shoplifting arrests were committed by just 327 people, together racking up more than 6,600 busts. Further, felony assaults by repeat offenders have surged over 146% over the past 6 years, with suspects with three or more arrests charged 442 times in 2024. And it's not just in New York. And in Washington, D.C., roughly 2/3 of individuals returning from prison recidivate. In Atlanta in 2022, 1,000 were responsible for 40% of the city's crimes. And in Philadelphia, of the more than 2,200 people arrested for shootings between 2015 and 2021, 76% of them had prior arrests, and 51% had been arrested 2 or 3 more times. So when I say the revolving door, what we're seeing here is, as I mentioned earlier, it's a small cohort of individuals committing an oversized impact of the crime, meaning if they are to be held to justice, we'd likely see a vastly improved quality of life for law-abiding citizens, the community as a whole. And there's a way we can approach that from a way that considers human dignity, but that doesn't mean that individuals shouldn't be held accountable for their own actions.
You spoke about the murderer of Iryna Zarutska and how he had a history of violent crime and yet he was free. So why are so many, I would say, violent criminals and even drug offenders being released again and again in the United States? Is this a policy failure, or is this a philosophical failure, or maybe both?
Right. And I would argue it is both. And as I mentioned earlier, I do think that a lot of these criminal justice reform policies are coming from a place, I think a lot of these people are well intentioned. But we have to judge policies by the results, not by their intentions. And what we're seeing here is the community being put at risk as a whole. I think that there's this a concept or this philosophy that it's compassionate to, even when people continue to commit crimes, that because of society as a whole, or because of or whether it be someone's upbringing or background, that it's compassionate to let them back out and to not hold them accountable. And when I say let them back out, oftentimes it's premature. Um, I think what we have to look at here is the signal it's sending to others. If when individuals are seeing that others are committing crimes and they're getting out over and over again, it's putting all the wrong incentives out there. It's sending a signal that you can get away with these things and that you can continue doing them, and then you'll just get back out. That's not doing a service to particularly to younger people too, who are seeing this. They're seeing this example. They're knowing they can get away with it. In DC, particularly, we've had a big problem with young people between 14, 15, 16 committing oversized number of carjackings, because for a long time the city was just kind of, they were going in, they were getting slapped on the wrist, being let back out. So the community was suffering as a whole because they were knowing that they were going to get away with this, and I don't think that's doing those kids a service either. Sending the signal that that you can get away with this, that this is okay. We certainly want to send a better signal of deterrence, and that you will be held accountable for your own actions, and that we're not. And I think if we're seeing this moving forward, we will see, and we already have seen in a lot of places that have implemented policies, decreasing crime, and that people are deterred.
Right. I was actually speaking to another Young Voices contributor, and he is also based in Washington, D.C. He was talking about how the Trump administration has deployed the National Guard in the streets and how that has actually brought down crime. He basically said that he himself felt safer at night, and there was a sharp decrease in carjackings, as you said. There was a sharp decrease in stabbings, and even a sharp decline in smaller misdemeanors. So is the battle really about safety? Because there is also a major population in the US which is calling for removal of the National Guard. They're saying that it's undemocratic. There's also voices which are calling for defunding the police. So it seems like this is now become a battle of political ideology.
Mm-hmm.
What are your opinions and thoughts on that?
I think it has become a battle of public safety versus disproven ideology. Again, as I keep mentioning, I think a lot of this ideology is well intentioned, but we should approach this from a perspective of science. The numbers are clear. When people started being held accountable again, particularly in DC, we did see a sharp reduction in crime. I would argue, because that deterrent was restored. People knew there were consequences again, and crime went down. Now, I think there's a real debate to be had about what the National Guard involvement should look like. That's another conversation. However, what we have seen and what can't be denied is when consequences were restored, so was the deterrent, and we see crime come down. And I think that we would certainly see similar results in other cities if they go forth and decide to change some of their policies on holding people accountable.
Right. So let's talk about that policy. Imagine you're a policymaker. What's one reform you would like to bring in that could actually reduce crime?
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm going to cheat and kind of pick. I'm going to make a two-part one, if you will. But I think some of the two that come to mind first is one, get back to holding individuals accountable for their own actions. If you're doing something, you've made the decision to do it. Yes, there may be unfortunate things in someone's history, but you're not doing them a service by sending a signal that they can just get away with crimes and things that's going to lead them to a worse path in their life. We have to get back to holding individuals accountable. Two, on the mental health, in terms of mental health, it's not compassionate to leave, and I'm speaking on to chronic homelessness here, particularly when it relates to drug use. It's not compassionate to just leave people on the streets either, and it's certainly not going to make families feel safe and comfortable using public transit, partaking in urban spaces if it's overtaken by chronic homelessness. But yeah, it's not compassionate to leave them on the street. I think what we need to consider is, in extreme examples, first, strengthen mental health treatment for individuals, and what cities and what states offer. And in extreme examples, I think court-ordered treatment should be necessary, with full respect for due process and human dignity, of course. We cannot make the mistakes of the past that we have with court-ordered treatments. However, there are cases where this will be necessary, when it comes to, protecting public safety, making spaces usable, and for the person's own sake, if they're ever going to get to a better place and off the street, oftentimes court-ordered treatment is necessary, both in the interest of the individual and for the community as a whole.
Right. Thank you, Ed, for these insights and for basically explaining so simply of what can really be done and how small policy changes can really impact in making American neighborhoods safer, especially American cities. Thank you so much for giving your time and speaking to Fair Observer.
Of course. Thank you for having me on. I really enjoyed this conversation.
Have a good day.
You too.
Join the conversation at Fair Observer and subscribe to our YouTube channel.